Have you ever feared someone not because they threatened you, but because they were too kind? A smile that always appears at the perfect moment. A voice as soothing as running water. A presence that seems to put everyone at ease except you. And you can't explain why. They've never done anything wrong. And yet something deep within you recoils. It feels as though you're standing before a wolf in sheep's clothing, and your intuition whispers, "Be careful. This light is not real." Carl Jung once warned, "Whatever is not brought to consciousness comes back as fate." And often that fate arrives in the form of a person who has rejected their own inner darkness so completely that it begins to control them, while their outer self remains gentle, moral, and kind. In The Game of Life and How to Play It, Florence Scovel Shin writes, "Thought is the pattern of destiny." If you fail to recognize your unconscious thoughts, you will live in a world shaped by them, and sometimes that means entering relationships that appear to radiate light while their roots are steeped in unhealed shadow. I once heard a true story about a woman named Lauren living in Austin. She met a man who was universally adored, kind, gentle, peaceful, and actively involved in helping the community. But over time, she began to feel herself shrinking day by day in his presence. Not because he yelled, not because he did anything wrong, but because every time she expressed real emotion, he looked at her as if to say, "You're too much. I'm not like that." And so Lauren began to question herself. She tried to fit into the artificial light this man radiated. What she didn't realize was that she was living with someone who had never faced his own shadow, and therefore could not love a real imperfect person. He could only love an ideal. You see, not everything that shines is light, and not everyone who is angry is dangerous. The issue isn't emotion, it's whether or not we are honest about it. The most dangerous person is not the one who rages, but the one who has never allowed themselves to feel rage. Because that part doesn't disappear, it gets buried. And eventually it leaks out through control, through judgment, through passive aggression or moral superiority. And you know what? Your body always knows the truth before your mind can analyze it. Intuition doesn't lie. So how do you learn to trust your own signals? How do you recognize who is living authentically and who is merely performing a role society has labeled as good? More importantly, how do you ensure that you don't become that person yourself? The one wearing a mask of light while the shadow screams within. That is the journey you are about to embark upon, and it is not one to fear. Because as Florence once said, nothing can stand against a man who knows who he is. Come with me. Let us walk beyond the mask into what comes next, where we'll unveil the truth behind the illusion of perfect kindness and explore persona and shadow, the twin forces shaping all human relationships and perhaps your very destiny. In the darkness, every light carries a different meaning. Do you know which part of yourself you've always hidden away? The part you try to forget, suppress, or deny because it doesn't fit the image of who you think you should be. Carl Jung called this the shadow, and he didn't speak of it merely as a psychological concept, but as a sacred doorway to the wholeness of the soul. Many of us live our entire lives as if we are only light, kind, selfless, peaceful, in control. But what Jung discovered, and Florence Scovel Shin might have agreed, is that true light only gains meaning when it passes through the darkness. Not by avoiding it, not by rejecting it, but by walking into it, looking directly at it, and embracing it with a gaze free of judgment. When I speak of the shadow, I do not speak of evil. I speak of the authentic parts of you that have been buried for fear of rejection. The man who hides his anger because as a boy he was told real men don't lose control. The woman who suppresses her desire to shine because she was once mocked for being too much. The person who fears love because long ago their heart was shattered so deeply they had to lock it away. But these parts are not bad. Jung once wrote, "The shadow is 90% pure gold." When approached consciously, the shadow contains raw vitality, creativity, courage, and ancient truth qualities, buried not because they were wrong, but because we stopped believing we were worthy of living them. Jung once described a dream he recorded in his journal. He found himself in an old house descending floor by floor. The first level was the parlor. Below that, a library. But when he reached the basement, he discovered the remnants of an ancient civilization, something entirely unfamiliar, yet deeply known. He awoke and realized the house was his soul, and the basement held the shadow spiritual ancestors' buried memories, lost pieces of the psyche. We all have that basement. The question is, are you willing to descend If you are unaware of your shadow, you will be governed by it without knowing. You will overreact, lose control of your emotions, fall into paralysis or rage, and not understand why. You will feel drawn to unhealthy relationships and wonder what's wrong with you. But it's not your fault. It's the shadow pulling the strings behind the curtain of your awareness. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. But once you begin to illuminate the shadow, something miraculous happens. You begin to understand yourself, to forgive yourself, and in doing so, it becomes easier to understand and forgive others. The integration of the shadow is not about making it disappear. It's about bringing it into the light of consciousness. You begin to say, I can feel anger, and I choose to express it truthfully. I was once selfish, but now I understand why I needed to protect myself. I may feel envy, but I use it to uncover my deepest desires. And you become honest, strong, and trustworthy to yourself and to the world. Have you ever glimpsed the darkness within yourself? Share it with us in the comments. This is not a place of judgment. This is a place where you are seen wholly in both your light and your shadow. If something I shared awakened a memory, a dream, a feeling, a forgotten version of yourself, like this video, subscribe, and journey with me into the depths of the human soul. Because when you understand your own darkness, you don't just heal yourself, you become immune to those who have never dared to meet themselves. In the next part of this series, we'll decode the many personas, those social masks we wear, and explore how these roles may be keeping you from living your authentic life. Don't look away, because if you've ever felt exhausted from trying to be the good one, the next video might just be the mirror you've been waiting for. Are you ready? The danger lies in the fact that they don't know they're manipulating, and you're left with a subtle sense of debt guilt, the pressure to repay that kindness by abandoning your own needs. But kindness without self-awareness becomes one of the most insidious forms of power. Jung once wrote, naivete is among the most dangerous attitudes because it lacks self-reflection. Can you see it now? The overtly bad person, the rude, angry, reactive one, is often less dangerous because they don't conceal themselves. They may hurt you, but at least you see it. They don't manipulate the light. They don't wrap their anger in the silk scarf of, I'm only trying to help you. Picture a fallen angel, not one who rebelled against the light, but one who refused to acknowledge the darkness within. They continue to fly, to radiate, to preach, to heal, but their wings are torn, and their energy begins to transmute into pride, judgment, and unresolved pain. When you stand close to such fallen angels, you may notice yourself shrinking. You begin to strive to be worthy of their love. You walk on eggshells to avoid disappointing them. But you forget true love does not require perfection. It allows people to be fully human without performance. So how do you tell the difference between true light and false light? How do you learn to see through the persona and touch the truth beneath it? The answer lies in shadow work, the inner work of confronting the shadow. What is shadow work, and where do you begin? Shadow work is not therapy. It is a sacred meeting between you and the deepest parts of yourself. The part that once felt rage, the part that envied, the part that wanted to control, the part that felt weak or selfish. And yet, you do not blame it. You do not rush to fix it. You simply look it in the eye and say, I see you, and I am ready to understand you. A few ways to begin shadow work. Shadow journaling. Each time someone triggers you, ask, what part of myself are they mirroring back to me that I have not accepted? Track negative emotions. When you feel jealousy, anger, shame, instead of suppressing, ask what within me is trying to speak. Revisit your dreams. Dreams are golden gateways into the unconscious. The shadow often appears as strange figures or frightening behaviors. Do not ignore them. Practice forgiveness without bypassing accountability. Forgiveness is not forgetting wrongdoing. It is the willingness to see everything and still choose not to be controlled by it. And when you do this, you'll begin to feel a quiet kind of freedom. You no longer chase one-sided relationships. You no longer contort yourself to be good enough. You begin to embody a different kind of light, a light that has walked through the dark. Jung once said, we do not heal by understanding the psyche. We heal by meeting the soul. Share in the comments. Have you ever met someone like this? Someone so kind you couldn't speak your truth. Someone who made you feel guilty because you couldn't return their sacrifice. Speak it not to blame, but to recognize the true light within yourself. This community was created for that, not perfection, just truth. In our final part, we'll explore how to integrate the shadow So you no longer run from it, but live with it as a companion, a teacher, a guide. Because darkness, when loved the right way, will always lead you home to yourself. Here is a paradox, yet a profound truth. The more a person tries to be good in the eyes of others, the more likely they are to become a prisoner of the very shadow they refuse to face. In the previous part, we explored journaling, active imagination, and dreams as gateways into the shadow. But what happens when you actually see your shadow? When you write down a jealousy you've always denied? When you dream of screaming, fighting, running, and realize it's a forgotten part of your soul trying to return? What do most people do? They panic, they turn away. They say, "This isn't me," and then they go back to living as before. But no one steps into individuation, the path of becoming whole, without walking through this moment. Jung called this the confrontation with the shadow, a sacred encounter, not comfortable, but the only doorway to truth. Why? Because this is when you begin to see the inner mechanisms that have been silently running your life. You realize you were not merely a victim of fate. You created much of what you're living simply because there were parts of you that were never seen. This is where real healing begins. Try writing, "What am I most afraid others will see in me? How would I feel if no one needed me to sacrifice anymore? Who do I dislike the most, and what in them feels like a mirror?" This is the first step of individuation, to separate yourself from the idealized self-image and to begin seeing yourself as a whole, light and dark, loving and jealous, noble and selfish, and all of it deserves to be acknowledged. In the Red Book, Jung wrote, "No one who fails to embrace their shadow ever enters their own soul." And you know what? When you accept your shadow, you don't become darker, you become honest. And honesty is where true light begins. No more pretending, no more performing, no more living for approval. You begin to live as you are without justification. And then something miraculous happens. You become safe with yourself, and so you become safe for others. You are no longer easily manipulated by those who are overly kind, yet emotionally dishonest. You no longer fall into relationships that make you forget your worth. You no longer run from pain, you know how to sit with it. You no longer need a mask because you've built an inner pillar, the self. Remember this, the most dangerous person is not the one who expresses their anger, but the one who believes they are incapable of it. Because they are being controlled by a part of themselves they don't even know exists. And when the shadow surfaces, it does not pass through consciousness, but erupts through manipulation, blame, or covert control. You can feel it even if they speak gently and smile kindly. What about you? Have you ever recognized a part of your shadow? Have you seen yourself in your anger, your jealousy, your grief, and instead of rejecting it, you chose to stay with it? Share that with this community. In the comments, speak of the part you once thought was weak, but now begin to see as unnamed life waiting to return. If you're on this journey, hit like, subscribe, and send this video to someone you love. Let the shadow no longer be feared, but become the inner teacher we all need. In the final chapter, we'll explore the deepest teaching Jung ever offered, the reconciliation of light and shadow, and how to live in wholeness. We will learn to listen to the self, the original soul, and how every small choice can become part of the awakened path. You've come this far. Don't stop now, because on the other side of the shadow is the place you've been searching for all along. As you walk the path of shadow work, you may at times feel lost. You may wonder, why must I look into the painful parts of myself? Why not just focus on the light? But Jung once said, there is no enlightenment without seeing into the darkness. We cannot enter wholeness by ignoring the parts of ourselves we dislike. We get there only by walking straight into them with love and courage. You've stayed with this video from beginning to end. That alone says something inside you is ready to be seen. Maybe it's the child who felt abandoned, the voice that was silenced, the wild, untamed part that never got to truly live. And you know what? Once you begin listening to it, nothing and no one can manipulate you again. You're no longer drawn to those who wear masks of false holiness. You no longer fear your own intense emotions. You begin to trust the voice within instead of living by the expectations of the world. If you remember only one thing from this video, let it be this. The shadow is not your enemy. It is a piece of your soul waiting for you to come home. Every time you write down something you once feared to speak, every time you dream of something strange and choose to sit with it, every time you forgive yourself instead of continuing to judge, that is a small but sacred step on the path of individuation. It is a journey no one else can walk for you, but you never have to walk it alone. Share in the comments below. What journey are you beginning with your shadow? Is there something you're ready to accept today? Something you once avoided? Write it down not just to know yourself more deeply, but to remind others in this community they are not alone. Subscribe if this feels like a space where your soul can breathe. Because here, we don't just talk about the light, we learn to love the parts that were once forgotten. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having the courage to look within. And if ever you feel lost, remember on the other side of the shadow is always a doorway back to your true self. See you in the next video, where we'll walk even deeper into the path of inner rebirth and meet once again the self, the eternal soul, quietly smiling within you.